That's my mom.
That's your mom? Well, that's a coincidence.
Your brother is under arrest for murder. We found her body, okay? We found her grave, okay?
Weird.
He has spent weeks plotting one of the most perfect murders these Florida cops have ever seen, erasing any trace of his crimes, deleting surveillance footage, manipulating everyone around him.
Is your mom home? The officer stood at the door, looking down at Kayla Atwood's children. She'd been missing for days. 4 kids left behind while their mother vanished from a Pensacola daycare on April 18, 2024. What the investigators didn't know yet, the person responsible had already started deleting evidence. He'd been erasing surveillance footage before anyone thought to ask for it. Only a guilty man worries before he's suspected. To understand how it came to this, we have to go back to the beginning. Kayla Atwood's phone buzzed at 6:47 a.m. with a text she'd been waiting for. And she had exactly 13 minutes to get 4 children out the door. She was 32 years old, managing 4 children under 12 in a small Pensacola home without a car, relying on the kindness of near strangers to get through each day. This morning was no different. Tony, someone she'd met on the Tag dating app, had agreed to give her a ride to the daycare center where she worked. The text meant he was 10 minutes out. "Can you hold your sister while I get her bottle?" she called to her oldest son. He was 11, and he'd learned to help without being asked, the way children do when responsibility arrives early. He appeared in the doorway with the baby already on his hip. Kayla moved through the small rooms like she was conducting an orchestra, diaper bag over one shoulder, work bag over the other. Keys in hand, even though she had nowhere to drive. The 2 middle children argued over shoes, the baby fussed. Morning light filtered through the windows onto scattered toys and breakfast dishes she'd have to deal with later. "Tony just texted, he'll be here in 10 minutes, she said. More to herself than anyone else. Her phone was never far from her hand. Rides had to be coordinated, schedules had to align. One missed connection meant being late to work, and she couldn't afford that. Not when she was managing a daycare and raising 4 kids alone. She checked the time. 6:54 a.m. 6 minutes. "I know, baby. Mama's trying," she murmured to the crying infant as she grabbed the last bottle from the fridge. Her oldest handed her a sippy cup without being asked. This was their routine, silent cooperation born from necessity. The kind of teamwork that develops when there's no backup plan. The logistics of single motherhood weren't romantic or empowering. In real time, they were exhausting. Every day was a calculation. Who could give her a ride? Who would watch the kids if she worked late? What would happen if just one piece of the puzzle didn't fit? This was what single motherhood looked like at 32, not in Instagram posts, but in the gap between needing a ride and hoping someone answers. She glanced at her phone again. 6:58 a.m. 2 minutes. The baby finally stopped crying. The middle kids found their shoes. Her oldest grabbed his backpack without being told. Kayla felt the small victory of everything almost working out. Then her phone buzzed again. Tony was outside. Let's go, she said, herding the children toward the door with practiced efficiency. She locked up behind them. Bags on both shoulders, baby in one arm, phone in the other hand, just another morning in Pensacola. Just another day of making it work with what she had. She had no idea that someone was keeping track of every ride she accepted, every man who helped her. Someone who believed he had the right to know where she went and who took her there. Someone who had already decided what it meant when she stopped answering his calls. That someone was about to make his concern very public. The knock came just after 11 a.m. on January 2nd. Firm and official. The kind that made Kayla's oldest son freeze with his hand on the refrigerator door. 2 Pensacola police officers stood on the porch. The investigator who'd worked enough welfare checks to know the difference between real neglect and someone's grudge call looked past the boy at the tidy living room, beyond. No chaos, no danger. Just 3 kids home on a weekday morning. "Is your mama home?" he asked. The boy shook his head. "She's at work, at the daycare." "No, what about grandparents, daddy, anybody adult?" "Just us. But we're okay. She's coming back." He glanced at his partner. The call had come in. Anonymous children left alone, neglected, someone needed to check. But the house didn't match the complaint. The kids were dressed, fed, capable. The oldest was 11, old enough to hold down the fort for a few hours. This was the kind of call that wasted department time. He was about to wrap it up when the boy looked past him toward the street. "That's my mom," the kid said, pointing. A white truck was rolling slowly past the house. Windows down, someone at the wheel. He waited for it to pull into the driveway. It didn't. The truck just kept moving, crawling past like the driver was watching but had no intention of stopping. "That's your mum?" he asked. "Yeah, I think so." "Well, that's a coincidence." The boy looked confused. "It's kind of weird she just kept going." He watched the truck disappear around the corner. Something about the timing felt off. A welfare check for kids who clearly didn't need checking. On the same morning, a truck the boy swore was his mother's just happened to drive past without stopping. He turned back to the house. "You said your mama works at a daycare." "Yeah, she manages it." "And she left you here alone?" The boy nodded. "No shame in it." "She does sometimes. We're fine." These weren't neglected kids. They were kids whose mother worked and trusted them to handle a few hours on their own. But someone had called this in. Someone wanted police at this door. "All right," he said. "You tell your mama we came by, okay? Tell her to give us a call when she gets home." The boy nodded and closed the door. Back at the cruiser, the investigator ran Kayla Atwood's name through the system. No vehicle registered, no white truck, no truck at all. Which meant the boy had been wrong about his mother's vehicle. Or someone else was driving it. Either way, someone had called in a welfare check that didn't match reality, and someone had been watching them conduct it. The question wasn't who needed help, it was who wanted police at that door. The man who called Pensacola police that morning to report neglected children had a name, a history with Kayla Atwood, and a reason that had nothing to do with the welfare of her kids. Michael Fountain had dated Kayla exclusively for months before she ended it. But ending a relationship and ending his sense of ownership over her movements turned out to be 2 different things. He'd told her it was over first his decision, his terms, but exclusivity in his mind only applied to her. When he saw her climb into that yellow work truck with a stranger behind the wheel that morning. The call took less than 5 minutes to make. "Children, home alone," he told the dispatcher. "Neglected. Someone should check." His voice was measured, concerned, the kind of anonymous tip that sends officers to a door without question. And then Michael did what men like him always do. He went to watch. The white truck that rolled slowly past Kayla's house while police conducted the welfare check wasn't driven by Kayla. It belonged to Michael. He was behind the wheel, windows down, watching officers knock on the door he'd sent them to, watching them talk to the kids, watching to see if Kayla would come home and find police waiting. The mysterious caller and the driver of the white truck were the same person. The ex-boyfriend she'd left behind hadn't left her. He'd been tracking her movements for weeks. Who gave her rides? Where she went? Who helped her when she needed transportation? Every man who showed up became a threat in his mind. Tony from the dating app, the guy with the yellow work truck, anyone who got close. This is what control looks like when it can't let go, not violence yet, just the careful orchestration of authority figures to the door of a woman who dared to move on. Mikhail had made the call, knowing the kids were fine. The point wasn't to protect children, it was to punish her for accepting help from someone else, to remind her that he was watching, that he still had power. A false report. A performance of concern that was really about possession. When the officers left, they noted the call as unfounded. Kids were well cared for. No neglect, no danger. Just another grudge call they'd never trace. They didn't know the caller's name. They didn't know he'd been parked down the street, watching like he was watching a show he'd written himself. They didn't know that in Mikhail's mind. Kayla's crime wasn't neglecting her children, it was moving on without permission. The officers who knocked on that door believed they were conducting a routine welfare check. They had no idea they'd just become props in a jealous ex-boyfriend's surveillance operation. Or that the man in the white truck had already decided how this story would end. And that morning, Mikhail wasn't just watching, he was confronting. Mikhail Fountain saw the yellow work truck first. Then Kayla stepping out of her front door with all 4 kids in tow. Then the stranger behind the wheel watching her arrange car seats like he had every right to be there. He pulled his white truck up alongside them. Tony drove a yellow Penske work truck for a local tire shop and had agreed to help Kayla get her kids to daycare. A favor that would put him at the center of a murder investigation. But that morning, he was just trying to help a woman who needed a ride. "Hey, she work with you?" Mikhail called out, his voice friendly, casual. "She on the clock." Tony glanced at Kayla, confused. She was already tense, her hands frozen on the baby's car seat buckle. "Pull off. Just pull off. It's not like that," she said, her voice tight. Mikhail didn't move. He just sat there in his truck, engine idling, looking from Kayla to Tony and back again. Not angry, not yelling, just watching, just making sure they both knew he was there. Tony would tell police later what he remembered most, the way Mikhail kept looking at him through the rearview mirror, not at Kayla, at him. "He kept looking in the mirror at me the whole time, like he was deciding something." Kayla finished buckling the kids and climbed into the passenger seat without looking back at Mikhail. Tony pulled away, watching the white truck in his mirror until it finally disappeared. This is how control presents itself in daylight, not screaming or threats, just a man pulling up uninvited to ask questions he has no right to ask, treating a woman's ride to work like evidence in a trial only he's conducting. Mikhail drove home. He didn't follow them. He didn't need to. He knew where Kayla worked. He knew she'd accepted help from another man. He knew she'd dismissed him like he didn't matter anymore. That was the problem. She thought she could just move on. For hours, he sat with it. The image of Kayla loading her kids into that yellow truck. The stranger behind the wheel. The casual way she told him to pull off, like he was nobody, like he had no say in who drove her around, who helped her, who got close. He'd ended the relationship on his terms. But that didn't mean she got to replace him. When he finally picked up his phone, he didn't call Kayla to talk about what he'd seen. He didn't call to ask why she was letting some tire shop guy play family with her kids. He called Pensacola police to report her children as neglected and home alone. The call took less than 5 minutes. "Children home alone," he told the dispatcher, his voice steady and concerned. He hung up and waited. Knowing police would respond, knowing they'd knock on her door, knowing he'd drive past to watch it happen. What he didn't know yet was that this wouldn't be enough. Because the next morning, Kayla would get into that yellow truck one more time. January 3rd, 2024, 8:47 a.m. The daycare security camera recorded Kayla Atwood walking her children inside, one hand holding the baby carrier, the other steadying her oldest son's backpack on his shoulder. It was the same routine she'd done 100 times before. Sign the kids in, make sure the baby's bottles were in the fridge, remind the oldest about pickup time, hug each one goodbye. Love you, babies. Mama will see you this afternoon. She waved through the window as she walked back across the parking lot. Her children waved back, then turned toward their classrooms, already moving into the rhythm of their day. They had no reason to watch her go. She always came back. Tony was waiting in the yellow Penske truck, engine idling. He had deliveries to make, a full day ahead. But he'd agreed to give Kayla a ride home first, just a favor, just helping someone who needed it. "Thanks for waiting. I know you've got deliveries," she said as she opened the passenger door. He nodded. She climbed in. The door closed behind her. The camera timestamp read 8:52 a.m. when the truck pulled away from the curb. After that moment, Kayla Atwood vanished from every camera, every phone record, every point of contact, completely and permanently gone. This is what last moments look like, not dramatic or marked by warning signs, just a mother waving to her children through a daycare window, believing she'll be back to pick them up in 8 hours. She didn't know those hugs were final. The children didn't know they were saying goodbye for the last time. Tony didn't know that giving her a ride would make him a witness to the hours before a murder. It was just another Wednesday morning in Pensacola, Florida. Except it wasn't. Because while Kayla's children were settling into their classrooms, while Tony was making his first delivery, while her mother was assuming she was at work, like always, someone else was already moving. By that evening, before anyone had officially reported Kayla missing, before her mother made the first frantic call, someone had already visited a neighbor's house to request security camera footage and delete every frame from the night before. Who does that? Who thinks to erase evidence before there's even a missing person report? Someone who knows what the cameras would show. Someone who knows there's something to hide. Someone who understands that timelines matter, that footage matters, that the hours between last seen and first reported can make or break an investigation. The police wouldn't learn about the missing woman for 2 more days. By then, the neighbor's security footage was gone. The timeline was already scrambled. And the man who knew exactly where Kayla Atwood had gone was the same man asking everyone else if they'd seen her. Days would pass before investigators would ask the question that mattered. Who deletes evidence before there's a crime to investigate? The answer was in the daycare parking lot footage all along. The investigator froze the daycare footage at 8:52 a.m. and enlarged the frame, yellow Penske box truck, commercial plates visible. Last vehicle Kayla Atwood ever entered alive. The plate ran clean. Registered to a local tire shop in Pensacola. One phone call later, he was talking to the owner. "That truck here, it's ours," the tire shop owner said. He'd employed Tony for years and described him as reliable, punctual, and always willing to help people who needed rides. "Tony drives it most days. He does deliveries for us. We need to talk to him. He may have information about a missing person case." There was a pause on the line. Missing person who? A woman named Kayla Atwood. She was last seen getting into that truck on January 3rd. Another pause. Longer this time. "Sure, I'll have him call you. He's a good guy, always helpful." The investigator hung up and waited. 3 days had passed since Kayla Atwood had vanished. 3 days with no phone calls. No bank activity. No contact with her children. 3 days of her mother calling hospitals and friends and anyone who might have seen her. 3 days of nothing. Until now. This is the moment every detective lives for, the thread that pulls, the license plate that runs. The name that surfaces from the static of a missing person case that's already 3 days cold. The yellow truck had been right there on camera. The plate had led straight to a business. The business had given them a name. Tony, a delivery driver who'd agreed to give Kayla rides because she didn't have a car. A man who'd been in the right place at the right time to help a woman who needed it. Or the right place at the right time to be the last person to see her alive. The phone rang 90 minutes later. Tony was cooperative, calm, willing to come in and answer questions. No hesitation, no lawyer. No demands to know what this was about. Just immediate agreement to help however he could. "I can be there in an hour," he said. The investigator set up the interrogation room. Routine missing person interview, standard timeline questions, nothing aggressive, nothing accusatory. Just a conversation with someone who might have information, someone who might remember a detail that mattered. Someone who might know where Kayla Atwood had gone after she climbed out of that yellow truck. If she'd ever climbed out at all. When Tony walked into the interrogation room 2 hours later, the investigator noticed something immediately. Most people ask why they're there, what this is about. If they're in trouble, they're nervous, defensive, confused about why police want to talk to them. Tony sat down, folded his hands on the table, and waited. No questions, no confusion, no visible anxiety. Like he already knew exactly why the police wanted to talk to him. And when the questions started, his first answer was a lie. The investigator opened with the easiest question, the one any innocent person would answer without hesitation. "Did you have any females ride with you this week?" Tony shifted in his chair. "I had a female ride with me, but she's a dog." The investigator looked up from his notes. "She's a what?" "She's a dog." Silence filled the interrogation room. Whatever Tony meant by that, it wasn't an answer that made him look less suspicious. "An adult?" the investigator asked. "Yeah." "Okay, and what is her name?" Another pause. "Brittany." The investigator wrote it down. Watching Tony fidget with his hands on the table, something about the way he said the name too quick, too defensive, felt wrong. Like he was making it up on the spot. "Brittany," the investigator repeated. "And when did you give her a ride?" Tony stammered through an explanation about helping someone he barely knew, giving rides to someone who needed help with her kids. Nothing romantic, nothing serious. Just a favor. The investigator slid a photo across the table. Security camera still from the daycare. Yellow Penske truck. Woman climbing into the passenger seat with 4 kids already buckled in back. "Is this Brittany?" Tony's face changed. The lie collapsed in real time. "Okay. It was Kayla. I met her on Tag, the dating app. She needed help getting her kids to daycare." There it was. Not a murderer covering his tracks. Just a man embarrassed to admit he'd met someone on a dating app and given her rides. Worried how it would sound to police, worried what his boss would think. Worried that helping a stranger made him look guilty of something he hadn't done. Bad liars often look guiltier than actual criminals. They fidget, they contradict themselves. They say things like, "She's a dog," when they mean they met someone online and don't want to admit it. The investigator let him talk. Once Tony started, the whole story came out. Meeting Kayla on Tag, her telling him she didn't have a car, him agreeing to help because he had a truck and a route that passed near her house anyway. The kids, the daycare, the routine they'd fallen into over a few days. Nothing sinister, nothing planned, just a guy trying to help. But as Tony's story unfolded, the investigator's attention shifted, not to what Tony had done, but to what Tony had seen. Because the next detail wasn't about the ride to daycare or the favor he'd done for a stranger. It was about a man in a white pickup truck who'd confronted them both that morning. This guy pulled up while I was waiting for her to load the kids, Tony said. He was asking questions, asking if she worked with me, if she was on the clock. I didn't know who he was. The investigator leaned forward. What kind of questions? Like he was checking on her, like he had some kind of right to know where she was going and who she was with. A man in a white pickup truck, asking questions he had no right to ask, watching Kayla get into another man's vehicle. And that man had been very interested in whether Kayla was working with Tony. Tony shifted in his chair and described the moment that should have set off every alarm a man in an old white pickup who pulled up that morning. Blocking the street, staring at Kayla like he owned the right to question where she went and who took her there. There was a guy who pulled up old white pickup. She was like, "Pull off, pull off." The investigator looked up from his notes. "Pull off." Yeah, like she wanted me to leave. Fast. But the guy was just sitting there, watching us. What did he say? He was asking me. "Hey, she work with you? She on the clock?" Like he had a right to know. The investigator wrote it down. A confrontation, a man asking territorial questions about a woman who wasn't his to question. Did Kayla say anything to him? Not really. She just kept telling me to pull off. She sounded like she knew him and didn't want to be there. "And you left?" "Yeah. I had deliveries. I didn't think it was a big deal at the time. But it wasn't just some guy." Tony remembered the way the man kept looking at him through the rearview mirror, not at Kayla, at Tony. Like he was calculating something. "Can you describe him?" "Dark-skinned guy, older truck. It looked like pool stuff on the back, maybe. Work truck. Pool equipment. Work truck. White pickup. A man who felt entitled to interrogate a woman about her movements. Sometimes the answer sits right there in the interview transcript, in the middle of rambling details about pool equipment and rear-view mirrors. And no one stops long enough to recognize it because they're still looking at the person in front of them instead of the person in the story. The investigator wrote it all down. White pickup, confrontational, asked if she was working. Kayla told Tony to leave, but he didn't stop to connect the dots. 2 days earlier, officers had responded to a welfare check at Kayla's house. During that check, a white truck had driven slowly past, windows down, someone watching. The boy had pointed at that truck and said, "That's my mom." 2 white trucks, 2 moments of surveillance, 1 missing woman. The investigator noted the detail white pickup. Confrontational behavior, jealous questioning. But the connection didn't click yet. He was focused on Tony's timeline. Where had he dropped Kayla off? What time? Had she seemed upset? Tony answered what he could. He'd dropped her at home. She'd seemed fine, a little tense about the guy in the white truck, maybe, but not scared. The investigator thanked him, took his contact information, let him go. Tony wasn't the answer. He was a witness who'd given a woman a ride and gotten caught in someone else's jealousy. The investigator didn't know the white truck from the welfare check and the white truck from Tony's story were the same. He didn't know the man driving it had a name, but someone else did, and they were about to provide it. The investigator knocked on doors up and down Kayla's street, asking the same question at each house. Do you have security cameras that might have captured anything unusual the night of January 3rd? Most people said no. A few had cameras that pointed at their own driveways, useless for tracking a missing woman's movements. Then he reached the neighbor who lived 2 houses down from Kayla, someone who'd installed security cameras after a string of car break-ins the previous year. Before he could finish his question, the neighbor stopped him. Someone already came. The investigator looked up from his notepad. Someone already came. When was this? The day after she went missing, before you guys even knew she was gone. He said he was looking for her. The investigator's pen stilled. Before we knew she was missing. Yeah. I thought it was weird at the time, but he seemed worried. Said he was a friend. Asked if my cameras might have caught her leaving that night. And did they? The neighbour nodded. I showed him the footage. He watched it, then asked if he could delete it. He deleted it. The whole night. Yeah. Said he didn't want anyone seeing her like that. Whatever that meant. I didn't think much of it until now. The investigator wrote faster. Someone had come looking for security footage the day after Kayla Atwood disappeared, before her mother called police. Before anyone filed a missing person report, before there was an investigation to obstruct. Only someone who knew a crime had occurred would know to erase evidence before anyone started looking. Consciousness of guilt doesn't get clearer than this deleting surveillance footage of a crime before anyone.
That's my mom.
That's your mom? Well, that's a coincidence.
Man, maybe late 20s or early 30s, calm, polite, insisted on watching the footage himself. Said he was worried about Kayla. Said he just wanted to help. And he drove an old white pickup truck. The investigator's mind clicked through the pieces. White truck at the welfare check on January 2nd, driving slowly past while officers questioned Kayla's children. White truck confronting Tony and Kayla that same morning, asking territorial questions about whether she was working. White truck showing up the day after she vanished to delete security footage. The same truck. The same man. Moving through this case like he had every right to be there, like he was helping, when really he was erasing himself from the timeline. This man who came, the investigator said carefully, did he give you a name? The neighbour thought for a moment, then shook his head. No, but I'd know him if I saw him again, and that truck, I've seen it around here before. He used to come by sometimes. Back when Kayla lived here. Back when Kayla lived here. Past tense. Like the neighbour already knew she wasn't coming back. The investigator finally had enough to connect the pattern. A man in a white pickup truck who'd been watching Kayla, confronting the people who helped her, calling in false welfare checks, and deleting evidence before anyone thought to look for it. The investigator
I had a female rider with me, but she's a dog. She's a what? She's a dog.
Finally had a name to attach to that truck. Michael Fountain walked into the Pensacola Police Department at 2 p.m. on request. Cooperative and calm, like a man who had nothing to hide and everything to explain about his missing ex-girlfriend. The investigator had a pattern now. White truck at the welfare check.
She's like, pull off. Like, what? I just pull it on now.
White truck confronting Tony and Kayla. White truck at the neighbour's house deleting footage. And Michael Fountain owned a white truck. Thanks for coming in, the investigator said. We're talking to everyone who knew Kayla. Michael nodded, settled into his chair. Anything I can do to help? You called in a welfare check on January 2nd. Can you tell me about that? No hesitation. Yeah, I called about the kids. I saw her with that guy and I was jealous, I admit that. We'd broken up. But it bothered me seeing her with someone else. I shouldn't have called. But I was worried about the kids being left alone. Honest. Vulnerable. A man admitting his mistakes. Did you have any contact with Kayla after that? No. When we broke up, I deleted everything. All the texts, all the messages, clean break. And you didn't go back to her house? I never went back to her house after that welfare check. Why would I? Smooth. Each answer landing just before the question fully formed. The investigator made notes, watching Michael's body language. Calm, controlled, almost relaxed. A neighbour mentioned someone came asking about security cameras the day after Kayla disappeared. Someone in a white truck. Michael shrugged. I have a white truck. So do a lot of people in Pensacola. True. But most people with white trucks didn't call in false welfare checks or confront the men who gave their ex-girlfriends rides. Did you delete any other communications? Phone calls? Anything like that? Just the texts when we broke up. I wanted a clean start. Guilty people often tell messy, contradictory stories, tripping over details they forgot to rehearse, but the most dangerous ones have practiced their version so many times it sounds like truth, each word landing in exactly the right place. The investigator nodded, almost ready to believe the jealous ex explanation, almost ready to mark this as a dead end. Then he asked the routine question he asked everyone. Can I see your phone just to check the timeline, make sure we have everything documented correctly? Mikhail handed it over without hesitation. The investigator opened the Messages app. Empty. Not a single text thread, not one conversation. The call log, though that told a different story. Mikhail had called Kayla's mother hours earlier, asking if anyone had seen her. The investigator looked up. You said you deleted messages when you broke up. Yeah, months ago. But you've had no communication since then, no texts at all. Clean break, like I said. A man who deleted messages when they broke up months ago somehow still had nothing. No casual texts to anyone, no conversations with friends, no back and forth with family. Just an empty message history and a call log showing he'd phoned Kayla's mother asking if anyone had seen the woman he claimed to have moved on from. That wasn't the behavior of someone moving on. It was the behavior of someone covering tracks. The investigator held up Mikhail's phone, the empty message screen glowing between them. If you deleted everything when you broke up months ago, why is there nothing from the last few days? Either the days you say you were worried about her. Mikhail shifted in his chair. I clean my phone out regularly. I don't like clutter. Regularly? How often is regularly? I don't know, like every few days. Wait, no, I mean, I just don't text that much anyway. The investigator made a note. You don't text much? But you called Kayla's mother this morning asking if anyone had seen her. Yeah, I called. I don't text. So you never texted Kayla, not once since the breakup. Mikhail's hands moved to the table, fingers tapping. Maybe it auto-deletes. I'm not really sure how my phone works. iPhones do that sometimes, right? The investigator let that sit. iPhones don't auto-delete messages unless you specifically set them to, and even then, they warn you first. But he didn't correct Mikhail. He just watched. Look, I'm telling you the truth. I deleted everything when we broke up. Mikhail paused, then added, or I delete things all the time. It's just habit. 4 explanations in 5 minutes. Deleted at breakup, clean phone regularly, don't text much, auto-delete feature. Each version contradicted the last. And Mikhail kept talking, kept trying to fill the silence with something that sounded reasonable. The investigator let him. Sometimes the best interrogation technique was just patience. Let them talk. Let them revise. Let them build a story that collapsed under its own contradictions. So which is it? The investigator asked. You deleted messages when you broke up, or you delete them regularly as habit? Both. I deleted them when we broke up, and then I just kept, it's a habit now. I don't like having old messages. But you have call logs. Those didn't get deleted. Mikhail stopped mid-breath. The investigator could see him calculating, trying to remember what he'd already said, trying to figure out which version was safer. Liars forget which version they told last. Truth doesn't need remembering. But a fabricated story changes shape every time it's retold, each iteration revealing new cracks in the foundation. I guess I only delete messages, Mikhail said finally, not calls. The investigator nodded. Wrote that down. Let the silence stretch again. Mikhail fidgeted, his calm from earlier dissolving with each contradiction he couldn't smooth over. "Is there a reason you're so focused on my phone?" Mikhail asked. "I'm trying to help find Kayla, and you're asking about text messages." "Just trying to understand your relationship with her, how you communicated, when you last spoke." "I told you I called her mom this morning. That's the last contact I had about Kayla." The investigator let the silence sit for a moment. Let Mikhail's contradictions hang in the air between them. Then he moved on. Because the phone messages weren't the real question, they were just confirmation that Mikhail had a habit of deleting evidence. The real question was about something bigger, something the neighbor had seen, something Mikhail couldn't explain away with auto-delete settings. The investigator was about to ask about security cameras. The investigator opened a new folder, pulled out a single sheet, the neighbor's statement, and slid it across the table. "You went to a neighbor's house the day after Kayla disappeared, before anyone had reported her missing, and you asked to see their security camera footage." Mikhail looked at the paper. "I was looking for her. I was worried." "You were worried the day after she disappeared, before her mother called police, before anyone knew she was missing. I had a feeling something was wrong." The investigator let that sit. A feeling. The day after, before the missing person report. "The neighbor let you see the footage," the investigator continued, "watched you review it, and then later discovered that all of it, the entire evening, from the night Kayla disappeared, had been deleted." Mikhail shifted in his chair. "I didn't delete anything. You were the only one that touched it. The only one. Maybe it was automatic. Maybe the system..." "Security camera footage doesn't just disappear. It has to be manually deleted. You know that." Silence filled the interrogation room. This is what consciousness of guilt looks like in high definition. A man deleting surveillance footage of a crime 12 hours before anyone knows there's a crime. Before we reveal exactly what that footage would have shown, if you're still following this story with us, comment A if you think he knew exactly what he was doing, or B if you believe his technical confusion excuse. Add one reason in 5 to 10 words. Quick note: what comes next includes some recreated details for narrative impact, but the pattern of evidence deletion is documented fact. The investigator leaned forward. "Why would you delete footage from the night Kayla went missing, before anyone even knew she was gone?" "I didn't know how the system worked. I must have pressed something by accident." "By accident?" "Yeah, I don't understand that technology stuff." But the act Mikhail thought would protect him, deleting security camera footage, became the single clearest proof of his guilt. Because only the person who committed the crime would know to erase evidence before anyone started looking for it. The investigator pulled out another document. Phone records, GPS data, a timeline that showed Mikhail's movements the night Kayla disappeared. The morning after, the day he showed up at the neighbor's door asking about cameras. "You don't understand technology," the investigator said, "but you knew exactly which neighbor had cameras. You knew exactly when to go there. You knew exactly what to look for in the footage. And you knew exactly how to delete it before anyone thought to ask for it." Mikhail didn't deny being at the neighbor's house. He didn't deny asking to see the footage. What he denied was knowing how to delete it, claimed he didn't understand technology, didn't know about manual deletion, must have accidentally pressed something. Each word made it worse. Each explanation revealing how carefully he'd thought about this, how deliberately he'd planned every step, except the one where someone would remember seeing him there. And he still had more explaining to do. The investigator leaned back, giving Mikhail room to talk himself deeper into the hole. "So if you don't understand technology, if you don't know how these camera systems work, How exactly did you manage to delete an entire night's worth of footage without the neighbor noticing until you'd already left? Mikael's hands started moving, gesturing as he explained. You don't need the main monitor box to delete stuff. You can do it from the phone. I mean, not my phone, the system phone. The system phone. Yeah, like the app. You know how security systems have apps now? You can control them from anywhere. The investigator made a note. But you said you don't understand technology. I don't. I'm just saying, if someone were to delete something, they wouldn't need to be standing at the main box. They could do it from the app. And you know this how? Mikael paused, realizing the trap. I've seen security systems before. At work, I do pool maintenance. People have cameras everywhere. But that wasn't what he'd said earlier. Earlier, he'd claimed complete ignorance. Earlier, he'd suggested the footage auto-deleted, that he might have accidentally pressed something, that he didn't understand how any of it worked. Now he was explaining app-based deletion protocols like someone who'd researched it. Look, I'm telling you, I didn't know what I was pressing, Mikael said, his voice rising. But also, the system doesn't require weight. What I mean is, I might have touched something, but I didn't know it would delete the whole night. Maybe it was just one file. Maybe the neighbor is wrong about what got deleted. The investigator let him talk. Let him contradict himself. Let him explain in detail how someone would delete security footage while insisting he'd never done it. Innocent people stop talking when they realize they're not being believed. Guilty people keep explaining, adding more detail. Show exactly how much mental energy they've spent thinking about the thing they claim never to have done. I don't know how these things work, Mikael continued, but I'm just saying, if someone were to delete something, they wouldn't need access to the main system. The apps make it easy. Too easy, actually. That's probably what happened. I touched the app on accident, thought I was just viewing the footage, but actually I was in the delete menu. These things aren't labeled clearly. Each sentence revealed more. More knowledge, more planning, more evidence that this wasn't an accident. Wasn't a misunderstanding, wasn't the confused fumbling of someone who didn't understand technology. This was someone who thought about exactly how to erase digital evidence, who'd researched the systems, who knew which buttons to press and when to press them. The investigator watched Mikael dig himself deeper. Explain technical details about security camera deletion protocols, while simultaneously claiming he'd never understood how they worked. While Mikael was still talking, still explaining technical systems he supposedly didn't understand. A search team 20 minutes outside Pensacola was standing at the edge of a shallow grave. In 90 seconds, they would find what would make every one of Mikael's explanations about deleted footage and misunderstandings completely irrelevant. They'd found Kayla Atwood's body. The shovel hit something that wasn't dirt. The search team member froze, hand raised to stop the others. In the shallow depression 20 minutes outside Pensacola, the January sun was too bright for what they were about to uncover. 8 days after Kayla Atwood disappeared, search teams had expanded their grid to the outskirts of the city. Someone had called in a tip about disturbed earth near an abandoned property. Most tips like this led nowhere. This one didn't. The team worked carefully, methodically, documenting every layer. When the first confirmation came, fabric, then skin, then the unmistakable shape of a human form, the scene changed. Radios crackled, command was notified. The missing person case that had consumed the department for over a week stopped being a search and became a recovery. It was Kayla, buried in a shallow grave, hidden but not well enough, concealed but not permanently. The condition of the remains told the story even before forensics arrived. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't natural causes. Someone had put her here, covered her with dirt, and left her to disappear. The investigator arrived 30 minutes later. Stepping carefully around the evidence markers that now surrounded the grave, he'd seen Kayla's missing person photo 100 times in the past week, smiling, alive. A mother of 4 who'd vanished after dropping her kids at daycare. That photo was taken in sunshine too, probably on a day just like this one. The contrast between the bright January day and the darkness of what they'd found was almost unbearable. He stood at the edge of the scene, watching the team work. Professional, thorough, treating Kayla with the dignity she deserved even in death. But every measurement they took, every photo they captured, every piece of evidence they collected was building a case that would end with someone arrested, charged, tried. And he knew exactly who that someone was. The man who'd called in a welfare check before anyone was worried. The man who'd confronted her and the driver of the yellow truck. The man who'd deleted security footage before she was reported missing. The man currently sitting in an interrogation room explaining technical systems he claimed not to understand. Michael Fountain had made one critical mistake. He'd covered his tracks so carefully, so deliberately, that the cover-up itself became the evidence. You don't erase surveillance footage of a crime unless you know there's a crime to hide. And now they had Kayla's body. Now the missing person investigation transformed into a homicide case. Now every lie Michael had told, every deletion he'd made, every false welfare check and confrontation and explanation became consciousness of guilt. The investigator made one call. 20 minutes later, a tactical team was gearing up. They had an address, Michael Fountain's parents' house. He didn't know they were coming. He didn't know the grave had given up its secret. In less than an hour, the man who had been explaining away deleted footage would be face to face with the reality he'd tried bury. 3 patrol cars pulled up to the house on a quiet Pensacola street, and before the engines died, Michael Fountain's mother was already at the door. She was a woman whose maternal instinct collided with a murder warrant, willing to obstruct police to protect her son. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching the officers approach. The investigator led the team up the walkway, warrant in hand. Same day they'd found Kayla's body, same day everything shifted from missing person to homicide. Now they were here to bring in the man who'd put her in that shallow grave. "We have a warrant for Michael Fountain's arrest," the investigator said. "He's not here. You can't come in." "Mom, we have a legal warrant. Step aside." She didn't move, just stood there, blocking the door. Like her body could stop what was coming, like if she refused hard enough, the murder warrant would disappear. "You're not taking my son." The investigator's voice stayed level. "Open the door now, or we will force entry." She slammed the door in their faces. The tactical team didn't wait. They'd expected resistance. A door lock wasn't going to stop a murder arrest. 2 officers moved forward with the ram. 1 count. The door gave way, wood splintering as it swung open. "Clear the entry." Michael's mother screamed, tried to push the officers back, but they moved past her professionally, firmly, spreading through the house, room by room. She kept yelling, kept trying to block them, kept playing the role of protective mother. A mother protecting her son. Except her son had buried someone else's daughter in a shallow grave. The investigator moved through the house methodically. Living room clear, kitchen clear, first bedroom clear, each room empty, each closet checked. Michael wasn't standing in plain sight. He wasn't waiting calmly to cooperate. He hiding. "Where is he?" the investigator called out. No answer from Michael's mother, Just more shouting about rights, about warrants, about how they couldn't do this. But they could. They had a body, they had deleted security footage, they had a pattern of surveillance and cover-up and lies that all pointed to one person. The investigator opened the door to a back bedroom, looked under the bed, behind the dresser, then the closet. There he was, Michael Fountain. The man who'd called in false welfare checks, who'd confronted Tony with territorial questions, who'd deleted security footage before anyone knew there was a crime, who'd explained technical systems with practiced confidence, was curled in the back corner of a closet behind hanging clothes, knees pulled to his chest. Face
People has to be manually deleted, and it shows that it was manually deleted. You were the only one that touched it.
hiding like a terrified child. Michael Fountain, you're under arrest for the murder of Kayla Atwood. They pulled him out. He didn't fight, didn't resist, just let them haul him to his feet, hands going behind his back for the cuffs. The man who had looked so calm on camera, who had explained away every contradiction with smooth confidence, who had wrapped his hands around Kayla's throat, couldn't even stand on his own. They pulled him out like a child caught stealing. The arrest was just beginning. The interrogation room felt smaller this time. Detective Chris McDonough sat across from Mikhail Robinson, the shallow grave still fresh in everyone's mind. They'd found Kayla Atwood 3 feet down, wrapped in plastic, exactly where the GPS and timeline said she'd be. "Walk me through April 18th again," McDonough said. Mikhail's hands clasped on the metal table. "I already told you. Technical issues." "Right. The app glitched, your phone malfunctioned, the GPS randomly jumped." McDonough slid a photo across the table at Kayla's Honda Civic parked at his workplace. "But her car didn't glitch its way to your job site." The fluorescent lights hummed above them. Mikhail stared at the photo without touching it. His earlier smoothness, the steady voice, the reasonable explanations had vanished. Now he just looked tired. "We found her 3 feet underground." McDonough continued, "Not in a ditch, not on the surface, buried, with a shovel. That takes effort, Mikhail. That takes time. That's not a technical issue. Here's what separates a liar from a murderer caught lying. The moment when words stop working. When every explanation you've built collapses under the weight of a shallow grave." "I don't know how she got there." "Your phone says you were there. Your mother says you confessed. Your own words, Mikhail. You told her you buried Kayla." Mikhail's jaw tightened. The air conditioning kicked on a mechanical wheeze that filled the silence. He'd hidden in a closet during the first interview, playing the role of concerned boyfriend. Now he sat exposed under institutional lighting, with nowhere left to hide. "The plastic she was wrapped in," McDonough said. "Where'd that come from?" No answer. "The shovel. Where'd you get the shovel?" "Nothing." "Did you plan this? Or did something happen between you two?" Mikhail's hands unclenched. He leaned back in the metal chair, the scrape of it against linoleum cutting through the room. For 3 seconds, maybe 4. He looked like he might speak. His mouth opened slightly. His eyes shifted to the door, then back to McDonough. "I want a lawyer." 4 words. That's all it took to end 20 minutes of questioning. McDonough nodded slowly, standing. The interview was over. They had Kayla's body. They had his phone data. They had his mother's testimony. They had enough. Mikhail sat in that chair, hands now folded in his lap, staring at the table where Kayla's photo still lay. The girl he'd met through a Facebook group for young mothers, the girl whose son had played with his daughter, the girl he'd buried in a shallow grave and tried to explain away with technical glitches. The door closed behind McDonough. Mikhail didn't move. Outside that room, the case was building itself. Forensics, witnesses, GPS trails. Inside that room, the man who'd killed Kayla Atwood had finally stopped talking. But the evidence wouldn't stop. It would follow him all the way to trial, where silence wouldn't be enough to save him. The same metal table, the same fluorescent lights, but this time the investigator slid a photograph across the surface. Not Kayla's car, not her phone records, the grave itself. 3 feet deep, plastic wrapped around what was left of Kayla Atwood. Mikhail had already said the words. "I want a lawyer." The conversation was over, but the evidence wasn't. The investigator gathered the photos. Mikhail's phone data showing him at the burial site, his mother's statement about the confession, the timeline that put him with Kayla on April 18th, 2024, the neighbor who'd seen him digging behind his house when he should have been at work. A case builds itself when the evidence points one direction. GPS doesn't lie. Graves don't dig themselves. Confessions to your own mother don't vanish because you demand a lawyer. Mikhail sat in that interrogation room with nothing left to say. No more explanations about camera systems, no more confusion about automatic deletions. Just silence. And the photograph of a shallow grave 20 minutes outside Pensacola. The door closed. The interview was over. But the case wasn't. She was 32 years old, buried outside that room. The evidence moved forward without Mikhail's voice. Forensic analysis of the plastic wrap, soil samples matching his property, phone records showing every ping, every movement he'd tried to explain away as technical failure. The prosecution didn't need his confession. They had a timeline he couldn't break and a body he couldn't explain. Detective Chris McDonough had interviewed enough killers to recognize the pattern. They talk until talking stops working. They explain until explanations collapse. Then they go quiet and let lawyers do what lies couldn't. Mikhail had hidden in a closet during the first interview, playing worried boyfriend. He'd sat calmly through the second, offering technical explanations. Now, faced with Kayla's body, he'd chosen silence. The case file grew thicker. Witness statements from family who'd seen Kayla's fear, text messages showing Mikhail's control. The business surveillance footage he'd claimed was automatically deleted, except the system kept data for 60 days, not 30, and his deletion was manual, deliberate. Someone who knew exactly what he was erasing. You can't technical glitch your way out of murder when the victim is in the ground and your phone puts you at the grave. The charging documents were prepared. First-degree murder. Tampering with evidence. The case that started with a missing person report on April 18th was heading toward a courtroom where Mikhail's silence wouldn't protect him, where a jury would see the same evidence that ended the interrogation, the grave. The phone, the confession, the lies. Kayla Atwood's family had waited months for this, for the search to end, for the truth to surface, for the man who'd killed her to face more than questions in a room. Mikhail's lawyer could challenge the evidence, cross-examine witnesses, argue GPS accuracy, but they couldn't change what sat in that case file. Photographs of a shallow grave. A timeline built from phone data, a mother's testimony about her son's confession. The case was moving to trial. The jury had been out for 3 hours when the courtroom door opened. Months of trial evidence presented, witnesses examined, technical explanations dissected, all led to this moment. The case that began with a shallow grave was about to have its answer. Michael Fountain stood as the judge. The judicial authority presiding over his murder trial prepared to receive the verdict. The investigator who'd sat across from him in interrogation was there. The family who'd searched for Kayla when she vanished, the courtroom, silent, waiting. Has the jury reached a verdict? The foreman. The jury member designated to deliver the verdict in Kayla Atwood's murder case rose. "We have, Your Honor." But the verdict had already been written in the evidence. The prosecutor, the attorney who'd built the case proving Mikhail's consciousness of guilt, had made that clear. Not just that Kayla was dead, that Mikhail knew he'd killed her and tried to hide it. Why delete the footage if you had nothing to hide? The question had hung in the courtroom during closing arguments. Mikhail claimed automatic deletions, technical confusion. Except the system kept footage for 60 days, and his deletion was manual, deliberate. Why lie about the cameras if it was an accident? Because accidents don't require cover-ups. Innocent people don't delete evidence. Don't hide in closets when police arrive. Don't bury bodies in shallow graves and claim GPS glitches. The cover-up proves he knew exactly what he'd done. Consciousness of guilt. When the crime is proved by the criminal's own attempts to hide it. Every technical explanation Mikhail offered became evidence against him. Not because they were false, though they were. Because someone innocent wouldn't need them. A timeline built from phone data. A mother's testimony. A grave with Kayla's body wrapped in plastic. Evidence that didn't need Mikhail's voice because his actions spoke clearly. Kayla Atwood never got to hear this verdict. The foreman held the paper. The courtroom held its breath. 2 people had weighed the evidence, the deleted footage, the lies, the burial, the cover-up, and reached a decision. We, the jury, find the defendant, Mikhail Fountain, guilty of the murder of Kayla Atwood. Guilty. The truth that had been building since investigators found her car at his workplace, since his mother told them what he'd confessed, since they dug 3 feet down and found what he'd buried. Mikhail didn't react. The same stillness he'd shown in interrogation after demanding a lawyer. But the verdict didn't require his acknowledgement. It was court record now. Legal fact. The man who'd explained away every piece of evidence was a convicted murderer. The judge set the sentencing date. The defendant will remain in custody. No more technical explanations, no more smooth talk about camera systems. The jury had looked at the deleted footage, the manual override, the shallow grave, and understood what Mikhail's lies were hiding. Guilt. The word Mikhail Fountain had tried to bury along with Kayla's body was now official. The man who'd hidden in a closet when they came for him was convicted. All that remained was the sentence. The judge looked down at Mikhail Fountain one last time before speaking. The verdict was in. Guilty. Now came the consequence for strangling Kayla Atwood and burying her in a shallow grave 3 feet deep. Kayla Atwood was 32 years old. The courtroom fell silent. Not the tense silence of waiting for a verdict, the heavy silence of acknowledging what was taken. She left behind 4 children who will grow up without their mother. 4 children. 2 who were hers before she met Mikhail. 2 more born during their relationship. All of them left to navigate life without the woman who'd raised them, loved them, tried to leave the man who ultimately killed her. The judge continued, voice steady with the weight of finality. No sentence this court can impose will restore what you took from them. That's the mathematics of murder. A jury can convict, a judge can sentence, the law can deliver its maximum consequence, but none of it reverses death. None of it brings a mother back to her children. I hereby sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Life. Not years that could be counted down, not a term with an end date where Mikhail might walk free. Life meant what it said, every remaining day of his existence spent behind bars for murdering Kayla. You will spend the rest of your life incarcerated for the murder of Kayla Atwood. Mikhail stood without expression. The same blankness he'd shown when the verdict was read, no remorse visible. No acknowledgement of the 4 children sitting in that courtroom who would carry his violence for the rest of their lives. The man who'd explained away deleted footage, who'd hidden in a closet when police arrived, who'd manually erased surveillance evidence and claimed technical confusion that man would die in prison. Maximum consequence under law. 4 children who would never hear their mother's voice again. The judge wasn't finished. This sentence is justice, but it is not restoration. There it was. The truth that sits at the end of every murder trial. Justice doesn't resurrect. Conviction doesn't heal. A life sentence doesn't give back what was stolen on April 18th. 2024, when Mikhail strangled Kayla and buried her body, nothing can bring Kayla Atwood back to her children. The courtroom understood. Kayla's family had waited months for this. For the guilty verdict. For the life sentence. For the moment when the man who killed her would be held accountable. They got that moment, but they also got the permanent absence of Kayla at every birthday, every graduation, every milestone her children would reach without their mother. Justice had been served. The evidence, GPS data, phone records, his mother's testimony, the shallow grave had led to conviction. The conviction had led to the harshest sentence available, and still 4 children would go home without their mother. Court is adjourned. The gavel came down. Final. Mikhail Fountain would spend every remaining day of his life in prison. The man who deleted footage, who hid, who tried to bury the truth along with Kayla's body would die behind bars. Justice had been served. But justice doesn't bring the dead back to life. Justice doesn't bring the dead back to life. Michael Fountain would spend every remaining day behind bars, convicted and sentenced for strangling Kayla Atwood. But that didn't change what happened on April 18th, 2024. It didn't restore what was taken. Kayla was more than how she died. She managed a daycare, the same one where she met Mikhail. She juggled 4 children, 2 from before, 2 born during their relationship. She worked, raised kids, lived a full life in Pensacola, Florida. A woman who smiled, worried, loved, tried to leave when things got dangerous. That's what gets lost in the evidence sometimes. The GPS coordinates and phone data prove where someone was. The shallow grave proves they're gone. But the life that existed before the murder, that takes remembering. Her 4 children are older now, growing up without their mother. Every birthday she'll never celebrate with them. Every milestone she'll never witness. Every ordinary Tuesday when they need their mum, and she's simply not there. The verdict didn't change that. The life sentence didn't restore her presence at the dinner table. Justice closes a case. It doesn't heal the loss. Some questions will never be answered. What were Kayla's final moments like? What did she think when she realized the man she'd tried to leave was going to kill her? Did she think about her 4 children? Did she fight? Did she plead? What do you think about when you know you're about to die? Only 2 people were there when Kayla died. One of them can never speak. The other chose silence. Demanded a lawyer and left those questions hanging in the air forever. Mikhail Fountain knows what happened in those final moments. He knows what Kayla said, how long she fought, whether she had time to be afraid. He knows, and he's never told. That silence, that refusal to give Kayla's family even the small mercy of knowing, is its own kind of cruelty. The court could sentence him, It couldn't make him answer. But here's the final irony that convicted him. Mikhail Fountain was the only one worried about the daycare cameras before anyone thought to ask. He deleted the footage before it became evidence. He explained technical systems before there was an investigation. He offered elaborate excuses about automatic deletions and camera confusion before anyone suspected him of anything. Only a guilty man worries before he's even questioned. Innocent people don't delete evidence before police arrive. They don't hide in closets when investigators knock. They don't manually erase 60 days of surveillance footage and claim it was automatic. That's the thing about guilt. It can't help but reveal itself. Mikhail's excessive concern, his preemptive explanations, his technical confusion that later proved to be deliberate deletion. All of it was confession before anyone accused him. He was so worried about covering his tracks that he exposed them. Kayla Atwood's story ends where it began, with 4 children, a life that mattered, and a truth that couldn't stay buried. Not in a shallow grave 20 minutes outside Pensacola. Not in deleted footage, not in technical lies. The man who tried to hide what he'd done revealed himself by trying too hard to explain what no one had asked. Kayla Atwood was a mother of 4 children who will grow up without her. Her story ended in a courtroom with justice served, but it began with a life cut short by someone she trusted. What stays with us isn't just how Mikhail Fountain exposed himself through his own guilty actions. It's what was lost. 4 children without their mother. A woman who managed a daycare, raised her kids, and tried to leave when things became dangerous. The verdict brought accountability, but it couldn't restore what April 18, 2024 took from her family. This case shows us something haunting about guilt. It can't help but reveal.
Your brother is under arrest for murder. We found her body, okay? We found her grave, okay?
Itself. Mikhail deleted footage before anyone asked. He explained technical problems before there was an investigation. Only someone who knew what he'd done would worry that much, soon. His excessive concern became his confession. If this story moved you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts. Do you think guilt always reveals itself eventually? And if you know someone who would find meaning in this story, please share it with them. Thank you for being here and for honoring Kayla's memory by listening. This story is based on a real case. Some scenes have been dramatized for storytelling, but the core facts and the tragedy are real. Our deepest respect goes to Kayla Atwood's family and all those affected by this loss.